Welcome to Corporate Law Lab. I'm Neil Taylor, Director of the Corporate Law Center at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. Today we are joined by Laura Heingardner, who is Senior Vice President and Assistant General Counsel at Great American Insurance Group. And our co-host, unusually, is her daughter Maggie, who is one of our Corporate Law Fellows. So welcome both of you to Corporate Law Lab.
Thanks, Neil.
So Laura, let's go back all the way to undergrad. You went to UK. I'm sorry for that. I'm IU grad, so I have to say. We're a football school now, though, so you don't have to worry about us in basketball.
Legit.
I don't know how that happened, but I'm not going to tempt fate. And majored in poli-sci. Did you major in poli-sci because you wanted to be a lawyer? I guess I should say political science as a fellow poli-sci grad.
I did. I majored in both political science and communications, had a double major, and I thought that I wanted to go to law school. My grandmother had been telling me ever since I was little that because I loved to argue so much, that law school would be a natural fit. And then when I went to UK and had that double major and was getting close to graduating and realizing that there really wasn't much to do with just those degrees, law school was kind of the natural next step. I just knew that I wasn't ready to start working full time. And so I applied to law school.
And why did you choose Cincinnati?
I actually was planning to go to Ohio State, and I had been accepted and went up for a visit, and they basically kind of pointed to places. They, walk down this way and you see this, walk down that way and you see that. And I just didn't get a very warm and fuzzy feeling. And then I came here to UC, and it was the exact opposite. Al Watson was here, and he just gave me the VIP treatment. I felt at home from the minute I walked in. And this was, of course, the old building, which was not a showstopper like the current building. Al just was fantastic. I was able to go to a couple of classes. The professors came up and introduced themselves after class. People who were, in the classes introduced themselves. And it just felt like a great environment. And so I switched everything, and I was actually dating someone in Columbus, and then changed the whole trajectory and ended up coming to UC, where I met my husband and Maggie's dad. So it all worked out.
So the guy in Columbus didn't follow you down to Cincinnati?
No, ditched him.
So this is the first story. We've had a number of people on who have, and when I say why Cincinnati or why this or why that, they're generally following somebody around. First time we've had somebody leave their boyfriend to go to Cincinnati.
Yes.
That speaks even more highly of the school.
Yes, it does.
If you had taken federal income tax earlier, this is obviously a question your daughter wrote. Would have you chosen to be a tax lawyer instead of litigation?
I don't know, but I think this comes from conversations that Maggie and I have had over the years about when I was in law school. I think to a certain extent, it's still this way a little bit, but law school just kind of naturally pushes you, I think, toward litigation with the class selections, I chose to do moot court. So that obviously with trial practice and pretrial practice and legal writing, all of those things. And what I have said to Maggie in scheduling is kind of branch out early, because you just don't know what is going to pique your interest. And I didn't take federal income tax until second semester of third year, and I really enjoyed it and really learned a lot. And I just regretted that I didn't take it earlier, because it might have been something that I might have taken a couple more classes and maybe gone in a different direction.
Well, I'm impressed that second semester, third year, you were even paying attention still, because I took federal income tax second semester, third year, and it occurred to me, and I did the New York Times crossword puzzle
the whole
lecture.
time.
And then like 2 weeks before the end, I'm like, oh no, I'm going to have to learn something about this class. So,
Which
anyway.
sounds like the nightmares I still have about law school. Didn't pay attention all semester, and then all of a sudden it's time for the exam and I know nothing.
What stands out from your time in law school other than that? Which part do you look back on most fondly?
I really enjoyed, you going into law school, and I think still you hear these horror stories about, the competitiveness and people trying to undercut other people, or, back in the day it was that people would rip pages out of books, so that other people, and hide the books or whatever. And we're dating ourselves, but
books.
Exactly, that there were ever books. But at UC, it was an amazing camaraderie, an amazing fellowship, partnership. We worked together. I had my, not only, our small, I guess, what are they called now, cohorts, but then also a study group. And we really all worked together to support each other and help each other succeed. And then the great thing is, Cincinnati is such a small legal community, and so many people from UC end up in the Cincinnati legal community. I'm still really close with a lot of the people who I went to law school with. Even if I don't see them every day or, every week or every month, when I run into someone who I went to school with, it's just that instant connection. And so that's really the thing that stands out to me about.
And then when you graduated, you left Cincinnati, though.
I did.
Why did you? And you went to Greenbaum, which is, I guess, now part of the Dentons.
Honestly, they've merged so many times, I've kind of lost track of what they even are anymore. But at the time, it was Greenbaum, Dahl, and McDonald, and their main office was in Louisville. And they did have a Northern Kentucky office, but the gentleman that came to recruit here on campus, I still remember Jeff McKenzie, was from their Louisville office, and he was kind of their up-and-coming, hotshot real estate lawyer. And Greenbaum just, I interviewed at a lot of firms, and they were really dynamic. They felt really young and energetic and super involved in the community, which I was very interested in. And Louisville is, I went to, as you said, I went to University of Kentucky for undergrad, and I had a bunch of friends in Louisville. And so it was a pretty easy move to be able to move there. I actually lived with one of my college friends who had bought a house. And so it was just a really nice fit. But it didn't last very long. I worked there after my second year of law school, during the summer. Then they offered me a full-time position. So I moved in August. And then I think it might have been November, Bill Robinson, who unfortunately has since passed, but he was a big name in Northern Kentucky, practiced there for decades. And his assistant called me one day and said, Mr. Robinson's going to be in Louisville and he'd like to take you to lunch. And I went to lunch with him, and he said, you're from Northern Kentucky. You grew up in Northern Kentucky. You're a Northern Kentucky Cincinnati person. What are you doing in Louisville? Transfer to the Northern Kentucky office, and, it'll be a great fit. And I ended up doing that and moved here. And that was partially, not only had I grown up here, but at that point, my now husband was talking about moving to Cincinnati. So that was kind of it made a lot more sense for us to be here than it did in Louisville. And that's how that happened.
And you started in the litigation group there?
Yes.
Okay. What did you like about being a litigation associate? What was less fun?
I loved just getting to learn. I did a lot of commercial litigation. So getting to learn about the particular business that we were representing, that, learn the ins and outs of how they did the business and, kind of down into the nitty gritty of that. And then just learning about the cases. And I did love, the research part of it and trying to find things in the law, that would be helpful to us. And then, obviously as a young lawyer, then you're taking that to, the more senior associate or partner who's working on the case, and just being able to contribute in that way. And you could, contribute almost immediately. At Greenbaum, one of the other things that drew me to them was we got client contact right away, probably sooner than we should have. I was actually reaching out to and meeting with clients even when I was there during the summer after my second year. So they really gave you a lot of responsibility early, and I loved that. They did that not only in litigation, but in litigation particularly. They would have us going to court all the time as young litigators. And whereas a lot of my contemporaries who went to larger firms in Cincinnati, were toiling away in the library for 3 years before they got to even meet a client or, go to court. So that was a really exciting thing. And then what I didn't love about it is, believe it or not, since I was a litigator for, 18 years, just the constant fighting and the, constantly being at odds. I enjoy people. I like to meet people. I like to get to know people, kind of a people pleaser. And I, a lot of times, and this was one of the reasons I decided to move in-house ultimately. But, when you're representing someone in litigation, no one wants to be in litigation. They don't want to be fighting. They don't want us to have to sue someone. They don't want to be sued. They don't want to be paying legal fees for litigation. They feel like it's a complete waste of money. And
then even when you win, they're like, well, yeah,
but look at how much I had to spend on it. And so, people would say, Laura, love, fantastic. So glad I got to work with you. hope I never have to work with you again. Let's go to happy hour or dinner sometime. So that just, it was harder and harder for that to be fulfilling when I would look at, what some of the in-house lawyers were doing, or even lawyers in other areas where I felt like it was more of a win-win situation that they were able to accomplish for their clients.
So about 4 years into your career, you moved from Greenbaum to Katz Teller and Hill. Call it Katz Teller or whatever you want from here, but I figure Grant and Hill need their time in the sun. How did you know about them?
So when I was in law school, Katz Teller was the firm that was not as well known. It was kind of the bigger firms that were really well known. But I found out that basically they had a rule at that time, and I don't know if they still impose it, that they only interviewed, at least at UC, the top 5 people in the class. And they just would not interview number 6, not interested. They just, so it kind of became this thing of like, ooh, the people who, got to interview with Katz Teller, obviously, they're doing really well. So that was how I was initially introduced to the firm when I was in law school.
Yeah, I remember, now I'm going to brag about my grades because I remember my Katz Teller interview. I don't even remember why I took it other than it's like, well, this is weird that this firm, has set this as their cutoff.
Right.
Right. If I'd been, just a couple below where I was, I wouldn't have even got into the room. So I'm like, well, I at least got to see what this is about. And then it was Bill Russo.
Yes.
First words out of his mouth are, "We pay the highest." And I'm like, okay.
Okay, I'm in. Right. You piqued my interest.
But then, so I spent half of my summer there and half my summer in Phoenix. And as I was saying before we started recording, what Phoenix had that Cincinnati didn't was that my parents weren't there. So it was both dearly departed, and so I'm talking ill of the dead. But anyway, it was good to be 2,000 miles away, and that's how I.
And it's Phoenix. Phoenix is a great place.
So what was your experience like at Katz Teller?
It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Because it was a smaller firm. So Greenbaum, particularly the Louisville office, was a large firm, and especially at that time. Katz Teller offered everything, in my mind, everything that Greenbaum did as far as, getting the experience of being in front of clients and, going to court and doing all of those things, but in a smaller environment. At that time, I think it was 24, 25 lawyers, but it was still a full service law firm, except for kind of, maybe like patent law, and they just were, very successful. Everyone there, every room I walked into, the person who I was speaking to, whether it was Bob Pitcairn in litigation or Bobby Brandt, and he was one of the smartest people I had ever, been exposed to, Mark Janke in corporate. So that was just really exciting to feel like I could learn from these people who clearly were at the top of their game. Now, I will say, when I was at Greenbaum, I was contacted by a headhunter, which was how I learned that Katz Teller had an opening. And, she didn't name the firm, but she described it. And I said, "Any chance you're calling about Katz Teller?" She's like, "Well, how did you know?" And, so I said, well, it's kind of a giveaway, these things. And in my head, I really thought, I'm going to go because, they wouldn't interview me in law school. I'm going to go and I'm going to make them fall in love with me. And then when they offer me a job, I'm going to turn them down. And so that was my mentality going into it. And then I went and interviewed. And at that time, and they may still do this, I interviewed with every single lawyer in the entire firm. And just every person I met, I was super impressed by, the people who were the younger people at the time. And I, at the time, fell into that category. I instantly clicked with, and, one of them is still one of my best friends to this day. And I just felt a real sense of belonging, and that, kind of these were my people.
And if they were 25 lawyers when you joined, it couldn't have been more than 5 litigators, if that.
Right. Small. Let's see. About 5.
So there was no chance of being third chair on anything.
Right. You got a lot of great experience very quickly.
You mentioned Bob Pitcairn, and I just have a chance to record my own Pitcairn story. I saw him do a trial in Judge Rubin's court, who was the chief judge in the Southern District. And it almost scared me away from being a litigator, because between watching him do a cross-examination and 35 years later, I've still not seen a better closing argument. In a case that he lost, by the way.
Oh, really?
But he didn't. I think he could have lost it a lot bigger than he did.
Mm.
And I just sat there and was like, "Oh, I could never do this." And I thought, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't be a litigator." And then I went to Phoenix and I saw 3 or 4 other closing arguments of very good lawyers, and they weren't anywhere close
Mm.
to what Bob did. I was like, "Oh, okay, I can do
I
this."
can do
I'm just not going to be as good as Bob, but nobody is, so it'll be okay.
right. I had the same experience. It was fascinating to watch him work and watch a case come in from the very beginning. And he would start to put his trial binder together very early in the process because he wanted to have that roadmap of where do I want to end up? And then, okay, what's every step that I need to take to get there? And that was both, factually, what facts do I need to gather? Legally, what do I need to nail down? What are the jury instructions going to look like? And what questions do I need to ask in depositions in order to either, prove my case or put up my defense? So it was learning from him was definitely learning from a master in his craft.
So then after you made partner, or I don't know what it was called then, member or shareholder.
I think it changed at one point. I think it was partner when I was made a partner, and then I think later it was changed to shareholder.
Okay. You then decided to go to an in-house position. Why did you leave private practice? I guess what we talked about before, you just had enough of being a litigator?
It was around the time that I turned 40. And so I started practicing when I was 24. I was like 40, 41, 42, somewhere in there. And so I kind of felt like it was getting close to the midpoint of my career because, I think, okay, I'll retire when I'm 65. My kids were getting, to an age where they were more involved in things. And I can remember I was actually in a trial in federal court in Akron with Jim McCarthy. And we were there because we were getting ready to start on Monday. And so I was there over the weekend and I missed a pretty important event for one of my kids. And it was just kind of at that point, I thought, what am I doing? This is not, my priorities are, out of whack. And when I just thought about, the second half of my career, as much as I liked Katz Teller, as much as I, like and respect all the lawyers there. And honestly, I've said this to, anybody who I've ever talked to about it. If I ever went back into private practice, Katz Teller would be my first call. I think it's a fantastic law firm. So it had nothing to do with the firm. I just didn't want to do that anymore. And I thought in-house was probably the best move to be able to kind of get that work-life balance in order.
Yeah. Keeping track of your life in 6-minute increments.
Well, there's that.
There's a little bit of that where I remember when I first went in-house and I was like the Monday, maybe it was Tuesday. I think they made me play golf on Monday just to make me think that I was going into a cushy existence.
Right.
And, I worked all morning and I realized I hadn't written down any time. And I was like, oh God, I've lost the whole morning. And then I was like, oh no,
I have to do that. Right.
It's
Right.
cool. They don't actually care.
The recurring nightmare that I have, though, in addition to the law school nightmare, is that it's like the end of the month and I haven't put 1 minute of time in. And I'm like, what did I do all month? So it never goes away.
So you eventually ended up at Great American, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that was fairly soon after you went out of private practice.
Yes.
What was the job you went into there? Is it the same one you have now, or?
It's not. I actually went into the group is called corporate claims.
Mhm.
So there are several shared services throughout Great American. The legal department is one of them. Another one is corporate claims. And basically that area kind of works with all of the claims professionals and the claims organizations throughout the Great American family. So Great American is made up of 36 different business units, and each business unit is American's very entrepreneurial, and each business unit is very autonomous. And so each business unit has its own president. It has its own claim function. It has its own underwriting function. They have their own contacts as far as their agents and brokers, and of course, insureds. They all sell different, so there's some overlap, but for the most part, they all sell different types of insurance or have different focuses as far as the insureds. And then the corporate claims group works with all of the claims professionals throughout the organization just to ensure basically that we're providing what we say is world-class claims service. I went into, within corporate claims, there's a group called the Claims Counsel group, and we have lawyers everywhere throughout Great American, but there are only a small group who actually operate as lawyers on behalf of the company, if that makes sense.
Got it.
So the claims counsel group focuses on coverage. So anytime there is a coverage question, it gets referred to the claims counsel group, and they basically do the research and do a coverage opinion on whether or not that, that particular lawyer believes that given the facts and the policy and the law, is there or is there not coverage? I was not a coverage lawyer, so that really was, and everyone knew when I came in that that was kind of my foot in the door, but that I would ultimately move over to PNC Legal because of my background. So I was in the claims counsel group for about 18 months and then moved over to the claims counsel group. Or I'm sorry, moved over to PNC Legal at that point, which is property and casualty legal department.
So when you're doing the claims counsel, the coverage opinions, I guess, have more than one purpose. It's not only to give your best opinion on coverage, but it's also to avoid a bad faith claim down the road?
Absolutely. Yes. Now, luckily, Great American, and this was one of the reasons that I chose it, it is just a fantastic company as far as the integrity and the relationship with the insureds. So, bad faith is something that fortunately we don't see a lot of. But the coverage opinions and coming, in-house to a coverage attorney to have them, look at that is definitely one of the things that we have in place to avoid bad faith.
Okay. And not to suggest that Great American would have ever have a meritorious bad faith claim against it. So when you moved into the main PNC group,
Mm-hmm.
I keep thinking of the bank every time you say it.
I know.
So there, what were your responsibilities? Did you manage litigation in-house?
I did. So
Okay.
that was the first role that I went into. I managed, so there are really mainly two, I guess three, but really two types of litigation within Great American. It's either corporate litigation that is directly against the company, and that could be something like a vendor sues us because they think we breached the contract. And that really is against the company, but it has nothing to do with insurance, so to speak. I was responsible for managing what we call claim-related litigation, anything that arose out of an underlying claim, but the company had been named. So that could be a bad faith suit, because a lot of times lawyers will just include a bad faith cause of action, for leverage or to try to get the company's attention or whatever. Or it could be a situation where we had appointed defense counsel to represent our insured. For whatever reason, either the insured or Great American or a combination made a decision to go to trial. Let's say the insured had $10 million of coverage. And in this environment right now, this litigation environment, it's always been a roll of the dice to go to trial, but now it is even more so. So we've had situations where we go to trial, there's $10 million of coverage. I was just talking about one yesterday. The jury came back with a $190 million award. So now our insured is in a situation where they have $10 million of insurance coverage and $190 million judgment against them. 9 times out of 10, the insured is going to look at their insurance company and say, what are you going to do to get me out of this? And those were the types of cases that I would be involved in and would help manage.
In that case, you'd appeal, right?
Well, we'll always appeal. Yes. But even those sometimes are hard because it's harder and harder with the size of verdicts to be able to successfully bond an appeal because of, the verdicts are just becoming astronomical. So it's a very interesting litigation environment, right?
Yeah, I never lost 190 million, but whenever I lost something that was 7 figures, the first thing I would actually try to do was go to mediation in between the trial and the appeal.
Yeah.
I would try to mediate before the trial too, but that was always my go have at least the threat of an appeal hanging over them
Right.
while we tried to. And obviously we were going to spend more money than we were before we tried it, because I'd obviously made a very bad choice in taking that case to trial. How do you decide which cases to try and which not? How much of it is in your control as the insurer, and how much of it is the ultimate client?
It's really working together, but we try to resolve every claim short of litigation. I think now the biggest challenge in getting cases resolved without going to trial is when we just can't we either go to mediation and it's unsuccessful, or the other side just refuses to mediate and won't come down, just a patently unreasonable position demand. And so in that case, especially if the demand is beyond the insurance limits and the insured is saying, well, I can't pay that. I have $10 million of coverage and they want $60 million. I don't have $50 million to pay this and resolve it. So sometimes you just have to take it to trial if you can't get the other side to, sit down and have a reasonable discussion about a resolution.
How does it work managing the outside counsel when you're both have skin in the game between the insured and the insurer? Does one of you kind of take charge of outside counsel?
So I think with us, we have what we call panel counsel. And so most of the attorneys that we work with over and over and over again. So we've developed really strong relationships. Now, obviously, our defense counsel who we're appointing, they're representing the insured. So their obligations, their duties are to the insured. So that's who they're looking out for. And that's really is, a collaboration of, again, we try to drive things toward resolution, and the lawyers who we hire know that. And so we always want very unvarnished, bottom line, tell us if this is a really bad one, we want to know that right now. We want to know it as soon as possible because we're in the business of insurance. When we write these policies, we know that there's a chance that we're going to be cutting a check, for policy limits, or sometimes a little bit more than that. And so we work really well with our outside counsel in trying to get resolutions as early as possible for the benefit of the insured.
How much deference you give to outside counsel changed from when you first left private practice to having more in-house experience?
So the challenge that I think, and I think this is across the board, I don't think that this is specific to insurance because, there aren't as many Bob Pitcairns anymore who have actually had a lot of trial experience. More and more what we're seeing is that lawyers just don't have real trial experience. I don't know what the statistic is now, 98, 99% of cases settle. Mediations are a lot more prevalent now than they were 30 years ago. And so we definitely give deference to the defense counsel we hire because, as I said, we've vetted them and we have great relationships with them. But when it does come to, going down to, are we going to take this to trial or not? One challenge that we have, and I think the other side, I think everybody has it, is that lawyers just don't have the same type of trial experience that they had, maybe 30 years ago.
Yeah, I guess I was asking more personally, as a matter of corporate strategy. I know, when I first went in-house, I had a lot of empathy for outside lawyers who were working so hard and keeping track of their life in 6-minute increments and that lasted about 6 months until I was like, no, I'm the client. This is what we're doing.
Got it. So Katz Teller was so client focused in teaching us as young lawyers how to be, early career lawyers, how to be client focused, client service, all of those things. I don't know that I had that 6 months of empathy. I think when I went in-house, I kind of had the mentality of, okay, well, now I'm the client. And, I was brought up that, you're available. What was it that I'm trying to think what Mark Jenke used to say? Availability, affability, and ability. You have to be, they have to be able to get in touch with you. Affability, they have to want to deal with you. And then ability, once they get in touch with you and they're happy that they're contacting you, you got to be able to do the job. So that's kind of always been my approach with outside counsel too. Now, I will say, I generally give people the benefit of the doubt. So because we have this vetting process and because we work with lawyers who we've worked with for a while, I generally go into the case assuming that they're going to do a great job and, basically until they prove otherwise. So from that sense, I guess I do have, that giving the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't be the one saying empathy toward private practice. People in private practice is a bad thing. I just know I lost it very quickly. And I think similar, but I worked briefly at Katz Teller in the summer, and one of the reasons that Lewis and Roca for me was a good choice is both of them had that client service mentality. We had something called ORMS rules from our founder, and I never forget, rule one was answer your phone. It's, and it would drive me nuts if I called outside counsel when I was in-house and said, "Is Bob there?" And they would say, "Who's calling?" And I would say, "Oh, does it depend on who I am, whether or not he's there?" And I never understood why anyone would do something like that. And I had a rule with my own administrative assistants is like, you never, ever, ever do that. You tell them whether or not I'm here, regardless of whether or not you think I want to talk to them.
Right, right.
So what are you doing now? Is it still the same? Or is
So
it...
no, it's so I am still responsible for the claim related litigation, but in December of 2019, I took over running our operations team within legal. So basically, we support all 36 business units plus our subsidiaries in their insurance operations. So a lot of that is on the underwriting side. So if we have like a market conduct exam by one of the states, we're regulated at the state level, except for our crop division, which is a federal program. So at any time we might have a market conduct from a regulator. On my team, we're also responsible for government relations. So we deal with the regulators and then the legislators in all 50 states. And we work with our trade group, which is APCIA, in just trying to make sure that we kind of have our finger on the pulse of what direction regulations are going, what direction legislation is going, and how it could impact, our industry as a whole, and then specifically, obviously, Great American's business. So we do that on the operations team. I also do support any employment litigation that we have. Luckily, knock on wood, Great American is a pretty great place to work, so there's not a lot of that. But when we have some employment litigation, I'm sometimes involved with that as well. So those are my areas of responsibility.
How spread out is the geographic area? What you said about employment litigation, and I'd be the last to dispute that Great American is a great company. My father-in-law worked there for 25 years. How do you get uniformity across not just headquarters, but everywhere in how you treat people?
I really do think that comes from the top, but the other thing that I think contributes to that is our structure of having these 36 business units, because no one is super removed from the president of their business unit. And so while HR is another one of our shared services that obviously drives, a lot of employment decisions and things like that, it's also hire a really good person who's going to be president, and then that person makes sure that there's a really great head of claims and a really great head of underwriting. And then those people are responsible for finding people who fit the culture and fit. It really is interesting at Great American. One of the things, coming from private practice and working with a lot of lawyers at Great American, I mean, just like your father-in-law, I'll be there 10 years in January and I'm still practically a baby. I mean, there are people, it's 25 years, 35 years, 40 years. Someone just celebrated 50 years. And there really aren't a lot of egos. I mean, people they're really good at what they do. They're smart. A lot of them have been in the insurance industry for decades, and they just want to come in and do a good job and then go home to their families. And I definitely think that starts from the top with the Lindners, but I think it also is our structure of empowering the presidents of all of these business units and then letting them go and find people that work with their business structure within Great American and also within our culture.
So when I got out of law school, and you were a little bit behind me, a lot behind me, but I don't think anyone ever talked about legal operations as a job someone could do. What attracted you to it? And could you just describe it for people that don't really understand? You've got your in-house lawyer, your outside lawyer. I almost said outhouse because we had a tax lawyer here earlier in the week, and he's a stand-up comedian part-time. Okay. He said outhouse every time he referred to private lawyers. But where does legal operations kind of fit into the traditional mix of roles that many of us who've been at it for a while are familiar with, and that wasn't one of them?
So I would say that The way that our legal department is broken down, and this actually, our immediate past general counsel, Sue Earhart, who is actually also a UC graduate, when she took over, I don't know how many years ago, 10 years ago or so, she restructured the entire legal department and really kind of put it, even though we cross over a lot and we collaborate all the time, but she really broke it into 4 areas. It was litigation, corporate, compliance, and operations. And of those 4, operations, I would say, is kind of down in the trenches with the business. So corporate is more focused up, toward like acquisitions and licensing and things like that are more at the corporate level. Litigation is what I described before when the company gets sued. Compliance, obviously, is, again, more at the corporate level to make sure that we are, because we're a heavily regulated financial institution, that we are compliant with, those laws. And operations, we are working with the business every single day on the challenges that they have in accomplishing their business operations. So it might be a consumer complaint where one of our insureds, is upset about something and they reach out to a regulator and lodge their complaint, and then the regulator circles back to us. We'll assist with that. I mentioned market conduct before, but it's also one of our businesses rolling out a new product, and they're working on the language for a particular endorsement, and they want to make sure that they've thought through all of the ways, that there could be holes in this particular endorsement or this particular exclusion. We will, help them with things like that. They've gotten in a dispute with an agent and they want to, send a letter to, kind of work through that. We might need to non-renew or cancel a policy. We assist them with that. The operations team is really hand in hand with the business, helping them accomplish what they need to accomplish in order to have a successful business unit.
You mentioned that you weren't an insurance lawyer when you joined. How steep was the learning curve? I was looking for what's the adjective.
Right.
Learning curves. How steep was it?
We say when we interview people, and I found this to be the case, it takes 2 years to really not only understand insurance, but understand our business. Great American, I've never worked at another insurance company, but what I've been told is that we are different than, like, let's say, a Travelers who, largely writes the same type of policies. They write a lot of personal lines. Years ago, Great American made the conscious decision to get out of personal lines. Now we are still in it a little bit, but we are primarily a commercial insurance company. And so some of these other companies are much more top down as far as, kind of the edict comes from on high and everyone does it. I mentioned before, Great American is much more entrepreneurial. And so it really just allows, the business units basically sink or swim based on their own decisions. And they're given a lot of autonomy to make their decisions and run their businesses the way that they want to. And the operations, is a big part of that and helping them do that.
So when I'm watching CNN and something horrific happens, like a condo falls down in Florida or there's a massive train derailment in eastern Ohio, I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. You must go. I'm about to get really, really busy.
Yes. And again, because of the different types of insurance that we write, you would be surprised how many of those types of stories Great American is involved in at some level. At some, maybe we have a piece of a tower of insurance. So you mentioned the collapse of the condo complex, the Surfside condo that tragically collapsed in Florida a few years ago. We were the property insurance company for that building. Now, I can't remember how many people passed away, but they had $30 million of property insurance and the entire building collapsed. So it was very clear to everyone immediately that their $30 million was not a sufficient, amount money that was going to be able to make everyone whole. And when I say whole, obviously a lot of people will never be whole from a personal level. I just mean from a financial perspective. Right. And and this is just one story about, what makes me proud to work at Great American. We were very proactive with the court in paying our money in. And in fact, there was a piece of the policy that technically, I don't even know. It probably could be argued either way, whether we were even required to pay it. But we just said, we're not we're not going down that road. We're paying full limits. Here it is, paid it into the court. And the judge actually said on the record that how impressed he was with how Great American handled it, that, this was just a model of, what we would all hope for from an insurance company. When tragedy strikes, they stepped up, all of the things that you want to be in a federal court for a federal judge to say. So that is just an example of how we operate.
Well, and in a case like that, if you decide to fight, even if you were going to win, you'd probably still be there.
Well, we'd still be there. And then the reputation, the reputational damage. But again, that's what, when I interviewed, I can remember people talking about just the integrity of the company overall and just how we handle claims, and almost to the point that I thought, can these people really be for real? And, now I've been there 10 years and I, get to see it every day. So it really is great.
I remember I interviewed with the CEO once who told me there are no politics in the company. And I was like, oh, no, he
Right.
doesn't know. He either doesn't want to know or he doesn't know.
I always think if you have a company that's more than two people, there's probably some politics. The reality.
How do you manage competing priorities? Because you must have mentioned 9 different places where your group can get involved. How do you manage it when everybody wants your help at once? It's a good problem to have in one sense, but
and again, this kind of goes back to, the switch from private practice to in-house. Private practice really does prepare you for, I think, any type of in-house experience because of the customer service and the client focused and all of those things, and learning to juggle a lot of different things. The difference that I like about being in-house is I get to work with a lot of the same people over and over and over again. And so it makes it easier to say, hey, this, and this going on. Is it okay if this waits until next week? Or is this something that I need to move to the top and, and then communicate with the other people and say, hey, this just came up and this is a crisis. Can I bump yours? And because we all work together and we're all kind of in the boat together, the Great American boat, that's an easier conversation to have than when I was in private practice and something would blow up for one client and I had to tell another client, that other client's like, I don't care. Right? That's not my problem. So that's, I think, a difference. And the people who I work with are everybody's really understanding. And again, kind of, we have this kind of, we're all in this together mentality. And they know that if it's something that explodes for them, that I'm going to drop other things, to be there for them. And that goes for our entire legal department. We all operate that way.
How do you keep, maybe it's just the culture of the company doesn't allow for it, but I've certainly been part of companies where the squeaky wheel tends to get theirs raised to the top because nobody wants to listen to Bert complain about how awful we are that we won't put his matter to the top. So it's just like, I've got one lawyer that I'm just like, okay, you're Bert's lawyer. Whenever it comes up, go deal with Bert. Do you have similar things or have you found a better way to manage it?
Well, one thing that we have done with that is in the legal department, we do have relationship managers for each of our business units. And so if there is something, if there is a Bert, he will have the relationship manager who he goes to. And so if it really needs to be dealt with at that moment, then that person can kind of shuffle things around. And because we have a great team, everybody else will pick up the slack if Bert really needs attention right away. So that really is how we deal with it. But, I know it sounds like I'm not, it really doesn't happen that often, which is a good thing. And because the legal department collaborates so well, it might, during COVID, and I had just taken over the operations team in December of 2019, COVID hits, in March 13th is when we shut everything down, or when everything was shut down. Our team was busy like, I can't even think of a word to describe what it was, because we were dealing with, different ordinances and regulations, and, you can't cancel a policy here, you can't do that. And then I was also on the COVID committee, and we were making all the decisions for our company overall. So it was also a matter of, okay, California, this county just passed this ordinance that said, X, Y, and Z, how many employees do we have there? What's the, did they all come into the office? So we were dealing with all of those things. And it just was incredible the way, because our team was so slammed, everybody else pitched in because, with litigation, the courts were closed down. So they weren't quite as busy. And so, everybody was just kind of all hands on deck. And even if it wasn't, their job responsibility, everyone was absolutely willing to jump in and help.
We could probably do a whole episode on COVID. Maybe we should someday. But that must have been because with commercial insurance, you probably had a fair amount of business interruption insurance.
Yes.
That must have been an interesting time trying to figure out how, and sometimes having read some of those policies, it required the problem to have started in your Pilates studio.
Right. Right. Yeah. It was very interesting, as obviously just the environment of the time, but also legally. Just a lot of these issues that came up were novel. It had never been tested. It had never, some of these arguments that were being made, the circumstances had never, been such that they had been made before. So, not only like right in the thick of it, but, I think there are still some cases that are lingering out there related to business interruption and other COVID-related litigation on policy interpretation and what was the intent of this and what did the policy mean and is this covered or not? And so, yeah, it was very interesting.
So people that have been listening from the start are wondering, am I ever going to let Maggie speak? But in my defense, she picked this next part. So you're on.
I picked the end part. So I kind of want to take it back to law school. And I was wondering if you had any either general advice on law school, advice on how students can develop leadership skills really early, and how to choose the right work environment, because you might have a better vantage point than most, since you said that you went into Katz Teller's interview thinking that you were going to turn them down. So can you talk a little bit about
this? One thing is just what I said earlier about in law school, take classes that you didn't necessarily think you would be interested in coming in and be open to, even if you came into law school saying, I'm 100% going to be a litigator, be open to what else is out there, because you just never know what a class might open up for you or might spark an interest. I would also say focus on relationships, particularly if you're at a law school, like UC, where if you stay in the area, you're probably going to be practicing, with a lot of the people who you're going to law school with. And because as I mentioned before, Cincinnati is a very small legal community. Integrity is everything. Your word is everything. And I can remember when I was in private practice, I'm a little, removed now being in-house, but, there was a pretty short list of lawyers, but everybody knew who they were that people just couldn't trust. And so I think that's the main thing is just, when you say you're going to do something, do it. And when you make a representation, make sure it's the truth. And, then your reputation will speak for itself and you'll be successful. I think another thing, and this is something that, if I could go back and talk to my younger self, be willing to take chances and put yourself out there. And if an opportunity comes about, whether it's in law school or whether it's in the law firm, say yes, even if it's scary, especially if it scares you, because the times that I feel like that my job has been the most rewarding to me, this operations opportunity, you ask me what interests me about it, nothing was not on my radar screen at all. I was really focused on litigation, but the woman who had the job before me actually went into one of our business units. So she went from the legal side into the business and is killing it and doing an amazing job. And so this position came open and Sue came to me and said, I think you'd be fantastic at this. Do you want to do it? And I said, I do, if I can still keep, kind of one foot in litigation, if I can still keep the claim-related litigation, then I would love to do it. Now, of course, when I said yes, I had no idea COVID, none of us did, that COVID was coming. So that was, just a crazy time, but absolutely say yes to opportunities that are out of your comfort zone and that scare you. And then as far as the job and the environment, I think I would just say trust your instincts. So yes, I went in, with, not a very good attitude into the Katz Teller interview, but from the first interviews, everything inside of me was saying, you need to take this job. This is a great job. And the same thing, going back to where we started, coming to UC, on paper at the time, and I don't know what it is now, but in the rankings at the time. Ohio State was quote unquote a better law school. It was ranked higher. And I had gotten a nice package from them. But when I came to UC, everything inside of me was telling me that this is where I belonged. And luckily I listened or you wouldn't be here. So I think just trust your gut.
Can you give an example of another time that you kind of took a leap and it ended up paying off?
Well, I think moving in-house. I think it was, so I was a partner at Katz Teller, or shareholder at Katz Teller. Fantastic job, fantastic colleagues. I had kind of reached, when I was in law school, my goal was to be a partner at a law firm, and I had achieved that. It is a very successful law firm, so I was, in a position where a lot of people, would look and say that's kind of the pinnacle or the where you want to be. But I just knew that I couldn't keep doing it for another 20 years. And so taking the leap and going in-house. And I took a pay cut. I went from, I remember I used to joke, that my office at Katz Teller was on the Gold Coast because it overlooked the Ohio River, not quite gold, more brown, but some days when the sun shone on it just right, it looked gold. And I had this big, beautiful office. And when I went to Great American, unless you are one of the presidents of the business units or the president of the company, you internal office. So I went from this big, beautiful office to a smaller office, that was, and we have a lot of lawyers who come from big firms who are in great offices, and then they come to Great American and they're in cubicles. And it can feel, like a step backward. But I knew that I wanted an in-house experience and I wanted to build a career there and took that chance.
Yeah, I've seen the people that don't make that transition easily are the ones who get annoyed at things like making their own photocopies.
Exactly.
Because, when I was at Lewis and Roca, not only did I not make a photocopy, very rarely I did, but my secretary didn't either. There were people
There
that
were
did that.
people in the copy room.
There were copy people in the copy room. Of course, this is still, this is all dark ages where there was
Right.
paper and things about. But
faxes and
yeah.
oh, I know. We could go down the whole, the typewriters and
Yeah.
But
I think the people that didn't make the transition well were those that were like, what do you mean I have to make photocopies? What do you mean?
That's not my job.
Yeah, that can't be my job. I'm too much for that.
And that goes back to, I think I said it before, but say yes to opportunities, regardless of what it is. Even if it's not something that scares you, if someone comes to you and they need your help, they've come to you for a reason. Say yes, because that person, I've had this experience at Great American where someone will come and ask for something that is technically not in my area of responsibility, but I did it and they were, happy with the work that I did. And then the next time they had an issue that was a lot bigger and a lot more interesting and a lot juicier and more high profile in the company, they came back to me. And that gave me an opportunity to work closely with a couple of our reporting officers that I otherwise might not have, always worked with. So you just never know what saying yes, what door it's going to open.
Other than making like a career path change or saying yes, what other things can you do to kind of keep passion for the profession?
I think the biggest thing is to be curious. Don't be afraid to ask questions because you think it's going to make you look stupid or you feel like you've gotten all the information that you need. If you keep that curiosity, whether it's, right now is a great example, AI and everything that's going on with AI. I'm 54 years old. I now kind of know what it felt like, for the quote unquote older attorneys, when the internet started. And of course I was, the age at that point where that was exciting and I wanted to learn all about it and whatever. Now I'm looking and I'm like, oh man, AI, I'm going to have to learn something new that's overwhelming and a little bit intimidating. If you keep that curiosity and, be open to learning new things, I think it also helps you keep your passion for your work and what you're doing. The other thing I would say is get involved in mentoring early career people. I get so much joy out of working with, early to mid career people. And that really helps me keep my passion. Another thing I would say, saying yes to things like this or interviewing wherever you work, interview other people because it gives you the opportunity to get in front of people and tell that person why you like the company or like the law firm or I was on the recruiting committee when I was at Katz Teller. I was on the recruiting committee when I was at Greenbaum. And actually, that was when I was at Greenbaum. I was sitting for an interview. We were down in Atlanta and I was interviewing law school students. And that was the first time I realized I think I might need to look for a new job because as I was talking to the person across the table, I thought to myself, I don't think you're being totally honest with this person about your experience right now. And that was kind of one of my first signs. And literally 2 weeks later, the headhunter called me about Katz Teller. But we are interviewing right now for a position in the legal department because a woman who was on the litigation team moved onto my team. So now we're looking to backfill her position. And I love interviewing people and getting to talk about Great American overall and the legal department specifically and what we do because I'm very proud of it. And so that also kind of reignites the passion because you walk out of it there and you're like, this is great. This is a good job. This is a good company. I like what I do. So those are the things I would say for passion.
You talked about going in-house for work-life balance reasons. How did it work out?
So it worked out great in the way that my schedule is I can control it a little bit more. Now I still joke my schedule is really not my own. I mean, if somebody needs something, I'm there, but travel I can control more than I could, when I was in the law firm. But I do tell people if you think that you're going to move from a law firm in-house and it's somehow going to be a cushy gig, you are mistaken. It is hard work. I mean, we work.
Especially if you keep volunteering for everything that comes your way. I did the same thing.
Yeah. There's always something to do. It's not like you go in and you get there and, you check off all your things and you go, well, it's 4:00 and I'm finished with everything. I'm going to go home for the day. I mean, it's a lot of work. Now, I will say, one thing that was fascinating to me going from the law firm to in-house is when people put their out of office message. I mean, when you're, in-house, at least on the business side, they'd put, I am out of the office. I will contact you on, whatever date when I'm back. And when I was at the law firm, that just was not a thing. You were just always expected to be available and to respond. So that was a change. But work-life balance, I definitely think that, I can only speak to Great American, but it is a very important part of our culture of people being able to, be with their families, make all the games, the plays, the vacations, all of those things. So I would say overall, it worked out very well. I haven't missed any other large life experiences, I don't think, of my.
Well, maybe we could refresh your recollection. The litigator in me, every time I hear I can't recall, what can we do to refresh your
Let's drill down on that.
If you could step back to when you were a 1L or a 2L, what were you worried about then that in hindsight you wish you really had just don't worry about that, it'll be fine?
Well, I was worried about getting a job. I mean, it wasn't a fantastic job market. And I don't know that I can sit here and say that would be something that I would tell myself not to worry about. One thing that I know that there is the opportunity now. I don't know if the opportunity was there when I was in law school. I know it was an opportunity when I was in undergrad that I did not take, which is study abroad. And some people in law school might think, oh gosh, I can't do that because that'll take me away from, the library or, whatever. That would be something, that's one of my regrets, both of undergrad and law school. If I could go back and do it again, I would take every study abroad opportunity that I possibly could. Because the reality is, and I can remember, I wanted to actually take a gap year in between undergrad and law school and take a year, and I wanted to work 6 months and then travel 6 months. I was able to, I had already accepted UC and I was able to defer my acceptance for a year. And my mother and my grandmother freaked out and said, you'll never go back. You can't do that, blah, blah, blah. You can travel after you graduate, from law school. No, you can't. No, you can't. I came out of law school. I had student loans. I had a job offer that I obviously was not going to turn down. And so I I wish I would have taken those opportunities when they had, presented themselves. Let's see, is there anything else that I would go back that I was worried about? Not that I can think of other than that. That's really the only thing that comes to mind. I think the worries that I had ended up being warranted. I wouldn't go back and tell myself not to worry about it.
That's all I have. Maggie, anything?
Well, since we talked about work-life balance, you don't really have the other perspective, but can you touch on work-life balance being married to another attorney? How do you guys handle that?
Oh, it is, it used to be when we both had, when you all were younger, we would literally sit down on Sunday night with both of our calendars and say, okay, who's doing what this week? Who's covering this, who's covering that? A lot of dividing and conquering. At one point, your dad, I was at Katz Teller, he kind of scaled back, I don't know that I would say he was part-time, but I would say maybe not totally full-time. And so we just had to do that at one point because of, all of the we have 4 kids and a lot of moving parts. The one thing, because a lot of people will ask me, is it just terrible, being married to another lawyer? It's actually fantastic for us. And they're like, well, what's it like to fight? And I said, and, especially because we're both litigators, but actually we're very respectful, when we kind of take that courtroom decorum, I'm speaking now, you can speak when I'm finished. That kind of thing. It has definitely been a struggle, but probably, not a lot different than, having 2 working parents in any job capacity.
All right. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. This has been fun. I appreciate it.